Bonjour, madame et monsieur, je m'appelle David. Je suis désolé, je vais parler en anglais. J'étudie l'informatique et j'étudie le français, mais je n'ai pas étudié l'informatique en français. So, je ne sais pas Cross Data Center Replication en français. Je suis désolé. C'est vraiment difficile. Et aussi, votre anglais est très supérieur à mon français. So. Je commence avec une question pour vous. I'll start with a question for you. Does anybody recognize this? Has anybody seen this before? Can you tell me where this is taking place? New York City, just outside of Central Park earlier this year. And what looks kind of like a zombie stampede. All these people traipsing away, and you're absolutely correct. Are you a Pokemon Go collector? Yeah. So for a bonus point, can you tell me the type of Pokemon that they were looking for? I think a Vaporeon. A Vaporeon. If you know what a Vaporeon is, well done. If you don't know what a Vaporeon is, also well done. And this is exactly what this talk's going to be about. You heard our CEO at the start of the day talk about the digital economy. And this is like the physical manifestation of the digital economy, creating some really weird physical peak of movement, and in this time of real people hunting for a Pokemon. And that's what we're going to talk about in this talk. Now, the talk is entitled Black Friday. So hopefully you're familiar with the concept of Black Friday, a huge retail event, started in the US, unfortunately, or not unfortunately, it's been in the UK for the last couple of years. When I did my homework for this talk, I learnt that the French have done very well to resist Black Friday. So it's not quite the same event here that it is in... But the point is that here's an application, and Black Friday is a huge retail peak in the digital economy. But nearly every industry that Couchbase customers operate in have something like this. The digital economy, regardless of the industry, is capable of creating these tremendous peaks. And I'll go through a few examples here. So we've already found a Pokemon Go player in the room. Does anyone confess to watching Game of Thrones? A few hands gone up. Me too. And so the new season of Game of Thrones, or the season premiere of Game of Thrones, it's a huge deal for online broadcasters, for streaming services. The amount of traffic that they get when there's a new series of Game of Thrones, or maybe the Olympics or a major sporting event. Watching England get beat at football from Iceland in Euro 2016, but we shan't talk about that. So yeah, again, completely different industry, but a volume of traffic that far exceeds the average traffic that they do. Another favourite of mine is gambling. I'm not much of a gambler, particularly on horses, but in the UK, there is one horse race a year called the Grand National, where nearly everybody has a little bet, €1 or €0.5 or the equivalent. So mothers and fathers and sons and daughters, brothers and sisters all choose a horse, and these, 40 or 50 horses hare around this track for 40 minutes, and eventually there's a winner. And the bookmakers, the betting companies, on the day of the weekend of the Grand National, can do up to 1/3 of their annual business in that one weekend. So it's an absolutely huge deal. And it's not just about the people placing the bets, making the transactions. Imagine all of the people looking for the odds, choosing the horse names on their mobile devices, the tablets, the laptops. Again, betting industry has this peak in like April, in the middle of the year, when everyone else is happily going about their business. But this weekend in April is the hugest week for these betting companies. You've heard from some of our friends in the travel industry today, and so airlines and travel companies, there are particular periods of the year where bookings are high. There's an Easter booking peak. Airlines will often do flash sales where they'll announce heavily discounted flights, and a bunch of people will jump on and try and acquire those flights for the cheap prices. And again, and this drives a volume of traffic that far exceeds the norm, another peak. Valentine's Day for dating websites, sites like Match.com that matchmaking relationships between different people, is again Valentine's Day, 14th of February. For some companies, that's the biggest time of the year, and their infrastructure, their database, and ultimately Couchbase is going to be hit with more traffic that weekend than throughout the rest of the year. What could be more exciting than the business of love? Tax. And so, again, in the UK, the tax deadline is the 31st of January. So when does everybody in the UK fill their tax forms? On the 31st of January. And so, again, if you're in the business of processing these financial records, the accountancy companies, the business software, again, this in the UK, and the same applies in other countries, 31st of January is this huge, crazy spike in traffic that they don't see throughout the rest of the year. And, of course, there are the retail examples, the January sales or Christmas Day, Black Friday itself, where lots of people have, we've got the example here of a new phone on Christmas Day. What are you going to do when you've got that new phone? You're going to register your device. You're going to download a bunch of apps. You're going to play with it. And so the people supplying the phones, the people supplying the apps, the people registering the Google Play stores, the iTuneses of the world are, again, on these days, the peak over Christmas is going to see an incredible volume of traffic. So that the illustration here is that it's not about one particular industry. It's about every industry. It's about the digital economy and its ability to create these volumes of traffic throughout the year. And it's fair to say that almost on a weekly basis, Couchbase deals with a customer who in that particular week is about to experience their peak in traffic for the most business that they're going to do in the year. And thankfully, this has become standard for us. This is what Couchbase does. It was designed from day one to cope with these volumes of traffic. The organisation is designed to understand our customers' needs when they come to us and saying, we're going to have a crazy weekend coming up. We're like, you know what, we've done this, we've got this, we'll work with you to be successful. Move on to show you a contrast of what happens when you don't do your homework, when you don't do your preparation. So this is a screenshot from a real website in 2014. And so this is from the Black Friday shopping peak. This is from the UK it would be November 2014, where clearly this online retailer's infrastructure wasn't ready to cope with the demand of traffic that it placed. And so a bunch of visitors to the website who were obviously interested in browsing the products, purchasing the products, were met with this message saying, really sorry, we can't take your business just now. If you'd like to wait 9 minutes, then we'll be right with you. And just think about that for a second. 2014, online, being told to wait 9 minutes. And who in the right mind is going to wait 9 minutes and then come back? Of course you're not. You're going to browse the competitors. You're going to purchase the competitors. Maybe you'll come back. Most likely you won't. And so I use this as a cautionary tale, and the rest of the talk is about we know that the Couchbase is designed to deal with these things, but there's a bunch of preparation that you need to do to make sure that the event itself goes off without a hitch. Here's a slide that you've probably seen quite a few times today in various different forms with some nice big numbers. And hopefully by now the message is pretty clear. Couchbase from day one has been architected with performance and scale and availability in mind. It's designed to cope with these massive peak events. It can take what we've got here, millions of operations a second, hundreds of nodes of hardware, terabytes of data, billions of documents. The architecture from day one is geared up to cope with the workload, whatever you can throw at it. My favourite stat on here is 4.5, which we released a couple of months ago. And we've prided ourselves for many years in being the leader in the industry for performance and scale. But the developer's attitude is not to rest on our laurels and accept that we think we're the best, so let's take the plaudits. No, we actually spent a concerted amount of time analysing the performance, scrutinising the performance and improving it so that those customers that upgrade to 2.5 can see up to a 25% boost in their throughput. So this relates to the key value traffic, the gets and sets of the documents from the cluster. Hopefully you get the impression that Couchbase as a technology is ready to cope with the demand that you can throw at it. But that's only part of the picture. There's still some homework to be done, and the rule of thumb is very simple, and it's this one. It's un autre petit peste de français pour vous, le cliché. But it's a cliché, but it's a true one, that preparation is everything. Anyone that's ever been to the theatre or been in a theatre production, what does every single theatre production do the day before opening night? They do a dress rehearsal. They do a dry run of the full thing, start to finish, to make sure that everything goes off without a hitch. And we would say for your big event, it's no different here. The easiest way of ensuring that your big event is going to be successful is to do the dress rehearsal, to simulate that event before it happens, so you can check, is your infrastructure ready to cope with the demand? What's your estimate of what the demand's going to be? What's the breaking point of your cluster? Is your infrastructure, and then fundamentally, as far as we're concerned, is your Couchbase installation, setup and configuration ready to cope with the demand it's about to see? So how do you do that? How do you build the confidence that your event is going to be a success? So we say, and this is something that hopefully most of you heard the talk from Amadeus. So they've been a fantastic partner, and they've pushed us very, very hard in the workload requirements. I mean, theirs is a serious use case. And everything I'm about to talk here is exactly the steps that we went through with them to ensure that when they flipped the switch to make that traffic live in production, that they were confident, had every confidence that it was going to be a success. So what I would say is the key message is do your dress rehearsal by whatever means you can. And that comes in two different portions. The first, you want to set up a representative cluster, some hardware that ideally completely matches your production setup, or at least mirrors it to as close an approximation as you can muster. Now, we understand that this isn't always possible. Sometimes there are real difficulties. If your production hardware is real hardware rather than virtual machines, laying your hands on that real hardware can be difficult. And so oftentimes our customers have to beg, borrow and steal from other groups, other teams, or the test hardware, the pre-production hardware. But if you want to know if your actual cluster your production cluster is geared up, then what we would say is make a representative copy. Probably more than around about 50%, maybe slightly higher, of our customers use virtualization. And again, a split of private virtualization in-house versus cloud virtualization with likes of Amazon's EC2, Google's Compute, and here we are in Microsoft's Azure itself. And so this is a fantastic way for getting an appreciation of, we have the scripts and the tools with things like Puppet and all of the other kind of automation technologies to be able to create a cluster with 32 cores and 50 nodes in a matter of minutes. So if you can use the cloud, then the really less excuses to not doing this stress rehearsal. And then the second is to simulate the level of traffic that you would expect to see, to come up with a workload that's going to stress your cluster in the same way that that's going to happen on the big day. So if you're a retailer, simulating the customers logging on, browsing your products, going through the purchase process, whatever it is, all of these use cases boil down to a set of transactions, set of indexes or queries or key value lookups on Couchbase itself. And so ideally, it would be great if you could have your own workload generator that mimics your application as closely as possible. Again, when that's not that takes an effort to produce such a thing, to produce something that mimics your application, that has a representative data set. As a cheap approximation, I mentioned one of the favourite load generators that we use. CBC, so this comes with libcouchbase, the libc library of our SDK. It comes built in with that. And I'm going to show you a demo very briefly of how you go about using that to simulate the traffic. Because fundamentally, Couchbase itself is a very simple little fellow. It knows nothing about booking flights or user sessions or tokens or logging in. It knows about documents and indexes and queries and key values. So even if you can't simulate your application itself, you can certainly simulate the level of traffic, the number of documents, the size of the data set that you're going to see on the cluster. So let me quickly flip to the terminals and show you what I've got the demo here. So hopefully they're un moment. Voila. So this is actually using Google Compute nodes. I have 4 servers. So each of these virtual machines has 16 cores. I've got 1 bucket with about 144 million items in at the moment. So preloaded with just some random data from PillowFight. And so I want to answer this question. This is my production cluster. How much traffic can it sustain? What's this cluster capable of? And the demonstration here I'm going to show you is regarding the key value traffic. So not so much on the indexing or querying here, but the same techniques apply. So I've got a console on my client, which again is a 16 core box. It has that libcouchbase, the CBC PillowFight installed. So I'm going to type all this live, so don't laugh if I make a mistake. Like that. So it takes a bunch of options, and I'll talk through some of the most common ones here. But what it lets you do, it lets you choose the number of client threads, i.e. number of client applications that you choose to connect to it, the number of items that you want to work on, the read-write ratio mix, the minimum size of the document, the maximum size of the document. And so let's just see how that looks in practice if I point it at the cluster I've got. So you start by telling it where your Couchbase nodes are. And the name of the bucket, which is Charlie. I'm going to start with a simple 1 client thread. And tell that client thread to do 1 document at a time. I'm going to work on, so I've got 144 million, but let's say not all of those are active, so I'll choose a working set of 50 million. A read-write ratio of 80% reads, 20% writes, which is reasonably common. A minimum, and let's use, say, 256 byte documents. And I'm going to put a rate limit on just so we can see the level of traffic. Let's see if this works. Okay, so there you go. 100 operations a second. Woo! Not very exciting, but that's a starting point. You're in the game. You're starting to throw some traffic at your cluster and see what it's capable of. You'll see that they're using about 2% CPU, so those 100 operations aren't making Couchbase sweat. So what we can do now is start ramping up the traffic and seeing what we can get out of it. So let me kill that. So I'm going to jump to, let's say, 32 client threads and 1,000 operations a second. Okay, and now you can see that load is starting to climb. You'll also notice that we're now, across each of the boxes, we're using around about 25% CPU. So each of the servers is about 25% utilized. We're doing just about 25,000 operations a second, and this is basically it. You can keep on playing this game until you hit a limit, until you hit a breaking point. At what point can you add no more clients, no more operations, until you can't make that line go any higher? That's one of the games, and then checking that everything else looks healthy. That you have, I'll call out some of the stats here. So I already mentioned the amount of CPU that the boxes are running. If you get north of maybe 80 or 85% of CPU, that's when things are running a little hot. You want, overall, a nice, steady disk write queue so that the operations that are being persisted to disk aren't waiting a long time in the queue, and that persistence is going nice and quickly. Further down, we have the replication queue, so transferring when the document is written to one node, transferring that replica copy to another node. Again, you just want to make sure in general that these queues are stable, they're steady, and not increasing exponentially over time. Let's maybe see if we can give it a little more juice. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. One of the other things that Pillow Fight can do, I only have one client machine, and normally in typical production environments, you have many hundreds, even thousands of clients that are running multiple threads. Here I've got a single box that's got 16 threads. So I'm going to cheat a little bit, and Pillow Fight lets you do that by saying it can throw 10 operations. It has a batch size, this -b parameter here. So you can tell it for each of those threads how many operations at a time do you want to throw. So if I boost that slightly, and let's see how that does. Okay, now we're getting a little more realistic. And so Couchbase is using a cool sort of 77% of the CPU, and you can see that the cluster is round about the 250,000 operations per second mark. And so at some point, you might declare that job done. You might have said, I've done my estimate of the workload over the peak, and clearly I've been able to demonstrate that my cluster is happily capable of sustaining that. So I'll let that run in the background a little bit and return to the slides. Perfect. So it's a picture of Manchester, by the way. So what we say is, when you're preparing for these events, don't just stop there. Don't just say, oh, I was expecting 250,000 operations a second, and I could do 250,000 operations. Success. Let's open it up to the customers. What we'd say is plan for the rainy day, for the worst case scenario. So can that cluster still sustain that many operations if I kill a node? If there's a hardware failure or the VM goes away, can I still achieve that level of operations? Do it. Do that dress rehearsal ahead of time to make sure that that your application can cope with a failover, that the cluster is still capable of sustaining the traffic. If you use XDCR as a high availability solution, when was the last time you practiced that failing over from one cluster to another? Because one thing we would say is you definitely don't want to be practicing that for the first time on the big day itself. If you rely on backups, then when was the last time you took a backup? How long does it take to restore from backup? If the entire cluster restarts and needs to warm back up and load its data off disk, how long does that take? So again, we encourage all customers that are planning for these big events to think about these things ahead of time. And then the interesting one, and I'll go back to the demo, and we'll try and do this a bit later. Okay, so based on my estimate, I said 250,000 operations a second. What if that estimate was wrong? What if the level of traffic far exceeds that? What's the actual breaking point? When should I start sweating that my cluster is not going to be able to cope with the demand? And I'll come on to that in a moment. I mentioned a couple of times already that Couchbase as an organization are very, very familiar with dealing with customers that are planning for these peaks. And we are tremendously happy to be engaged in the preparation, as well as the support team and the professional services teams aren't just about recovering things when things have gone wrong. We're here to help you plan and prepare for these events. And so why would you choose to engage Couchbase in the preparation? So one of the things that we do for a lot of customers is to run a simple health check over the cluster to make sure it's configured correctly. Have you followed our best practices in terms of Linux recommendations on swap, our own recommendations on the number of replicas, the number of buckets, the size and shape and configuration of each of your nodes? We are experts in analysing the logs and looking at the stats and looking at the graphs and picking out bottlenecks and surprises that may not be obvious to everyone. So at the very least, for a second opinion, we would suggest you call on us. For assistance like running a load test, if you say, look, I'm struggling to get the hardware, I'm struggling to come up with something that simulates my workload adequately, we can help with that. For those of you using indexing and Nickel, the GSI and Nickel, we do Nickel's a fabulous tool, and GSI is a fabulous tool, but often there are more than one way to solve the same problem, and not necessarily each of those ways are as efficient as the other. And so one thing we're finding more and more is that we're advising our customers on, okay, what you have there is completely functional and it will work, but actually if you structure your index slightly like this, if you structure your query a bit more like this, you'll be able to get a bit better performance out. So again, use that the knowledge that we have, use the expertise. We do try and push this back, and there are numerous blog entries and posts about sort of the cookbooks and recipes for these things. But as Couchbase customers, we welcome the questions about what's the most efficient way of solving this problem using Nickel. It's the stuff we love to hear. Occasionally, not so much anymore, but certainly a few years ago when this was a little more new to us. For a few of the customers, we would actually, over the event itself, we would be on site with the customer, helping them monitor the cluster. So a quick slide on what happens if you're aiming for 250,000 ops a second and you don't quite get there. What else can you do? Is there any tuning available, or is it when you're done, you're done? And so the first thing to point out is that for at least 95, if not 99% of use cases, Couchbase out of the box is designed to scale with the workload. So a number of our threads are dynamic based on the number of CPU cores that you provide it. So Couchbase will operate differently on a 24-core box to it would on an 8-core box. It will expand the number of threads that are used, the worker threads that are used to do things. And this pool of reader and writer threads mean that actually Couchbase itself will adapt to its environment. So most of the time, no tuning is required. The other thing we would advocate is to use good science and to do I would say premature optimization is pointless optimization. There's only merit in doing the optimization if you can measure the benefit that you're going to get before you've applied it and after you've applied it. So there's no point just saying, oh, there's some dials here to tune, let me just try them. What we'd say is do the analysis and see where the bottlenecks are. And let me quickly flip back to the cluster so I can give you a bit of an example of what I mean there. So let's. I forgot one flag, which was because I already had a data set, I didn't need to populate it, but I left that off. And so let's again tune this up a little bit. Let's give it some more. A few more threads, and see if we can start pushing it a bit further. Let's say 30,000. That's fine. 35,000. Why not? Oops. Okay. Let's see what the cluster's doing now. Okay, so a little better. So we're using here by changing the number of client threads, we're around about 800,000 operations a second, and you can see Couchbase is using about 65% of the CPU. What I want to very quickly show you is how you can just get one level of detail more about where that CPU is being used, and it's really very simple. So here I have a console on one of the nodes, and so I'll start by doing a simple top just against all the Couchbase processors on Linux default run as the Couchbase user. So if I highlight the CPU column here, you can see that the Beam process, which is our cluster manager, is using about 2 CPU cores, again out of the 16 that we have. But the performance, as you might expect from a heavy key value workload, is dominated by the memcached process. So let's take a a bit more scrutiny of the memcached process and see where those are going. So, whoops, let me just get, so the PID I'm interested in here is 2592. So again, we can ask top to tell us the threads of this particular process, 2592. Okay, and here you can see, and kindly, we've labelled each of the threads so you can see which tasks each of these threads are performing. And so the workers, these are our front-end threads, the ones that are receiving the operations from the client and then committing them to our in-memory cache. The writer threads, as you might expect, they're the ones that are taking these operations and pushing them to disk. Reader threads likewise. Non-IO, that's responsible for some of the inter-cluster replication. And so what you might glean from this is that most of the threads that are running a little hot are the workers. So as you might expect, we're running a heavy key value workload. We're doing about 800,000 operations a second. So those threads that are handling these requests at the front end from the client are running rather fast. And so this is how when Couchbase support get involved, when Couchbase development get involved, this is the sort of the first rudimentary analysis that we'll do to try and identify where the bottlenecks are. And each of these groups of threads, each of these, the workers, the writers, the non-IO threads, each of these are tunable. So if you suspect that actually your workload looks like it could do with more writer threads, if you have a particularly write-heavy workload, then there are commands available to tune these. Again, but we would only going back to the point I made here, we would only recommend that if you've got the evidence to suggest that actually all of my writer threads are completely maxed out. Normally, the thing we recommend to increase is the capacity itself. It's the easiest thing to do is to add a node to the cluster. And with multi-dimensional scalability, you only have to add the node to where it's really required. So if your indexer is the bottleneck, you can add indexing nodes. If query is the bottleneck, add more query nodes. If data is the bottleneck, add more data nodes. So you only have to basically spend the resource where it's required. And I mentioned each of those, the key value threads are tunable there. Couple more slides. So on the day itself, you've run your workload, you've done your homework, you think, yes, my production cluster is ready for the big event. On the day itself, what would you do? Well, we'd typically say you need to keep an eye on it. Make sure that it's ticking along as you would expect, that the level of traffic that you're seeing is consistent with your expectations, that the response time to your queries, to your key value lookups are consistent with what you saw in the load test, that your resources are behaving as you'd expect, that you still have ample disk space, ample CPU usage, ample memory capacity for the workload. Check in the cluster console that all of a very simple check, that all of the server nodes are reporting green and healthy. Oops. Takes a moment. To keep an eye on the cluster status to make sure that none of the individual nodes are having connectivity issues, etc. Those queues that I mentioned, the disk queue, the DCP, the replication queue, if you're using cross-data center replication, the XDCR queue, all of these stats are available in the Couchbase console and via the REST API. So you can write relatively trivial scripts to monitor this stuff. And in the unlikely event that something does go wrong, I would reiterate a point that a colleague of mine, Ian, made this morning, is that for our Platinum customers, you have a 30-minute response time for your P1 high priority issues. And when we say a 30-minute response time, we don't just mean in 30 minutes you'll get an email saying, thanks for calling, we'll get back to you. You get an expert that's assigned to your case, that's actively looking into your logs or on a conference call with you, doing a screen share, actively debugging the problem. And so we do 3 levels of service level agreement. Platinum gives you a 30-minute response time. Our gold level is 2 hours, and the silver level is 5 hours during normal business hours. And again, this isn't a level 1 or a level 2 type support engineer that you're going to get. This is someone who's an expert that's tremendously well-versed in dealing with peaks, dealing with workloads, analysing the problems, that will prioritise ensuring your business continuity, that getting your application serving traffic to your users is the most important thing. And I'll finish with an example of the rewards that can be achieved by getting it right. So this is 2015. Dixons is one of our good friends in the United Kingdom, an online electronics retailer, making news in the UK's most prestigious financial press, the Financial Times, about the record success they had on this Black Friday, this extraordinary retail peak that they had. And this is, again, to reiterate a message that you heard before, this is what we thrive on, that your success is our success, and this is exactly what we want to see. It's so rewarding seeing a customer achieve headlines for getting it so right. So to summarise, we have, again, the digital economy, and regardless of the industry, to create these unprecedented volumes of traffic against a Couchbase cluster, nearly every single week of the year, depending on which particular industry you're in. And since day one, Couchbase Server has been designed with performance, scalability, availability in mind, with the ability to handle exactly these peaks. The support organisation and the professional services organisation are well versed in dealing with each of these kinds of scenarios. And if you want to give yourself the best opportunity of having a successful day, then doing the preparation, take the time to go through that dress rehearsal, because the rewards are worth it. And with that, mesdames et messieurs, merci beaucoup pour votre attention.